Hey book lovers, I'm Elise and I'm very tired, but I wanted to make sure that I got these videos filmed and hopefully edited so I can get them up for the weekend. Do I look as tired as I feel? Good Lord. I just finished filming my best and worst books of 2024. Today I would like to talk to you about all the books that I DNF'd in the year 2024. There's a nice round number. I DNF'd 20 books. I don't think there's any really like rhyme or reason. I think for the most part, the book just wasn't working for me. Let's just jump in. These are in order of when I DNF'd them. So the very first book that I DNF'd in 2024 was Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. I was about 36% in when I threw in the towel. I said, despite the cold and snowy atmosphere of the Rocky Mountains and the severed heads and human teeth, I was pretty bored. I didn't care who died, didn't care who the murderer was, just didn't care about any of it. Essentially, I was very bored. This one did not do it for me. The next book is The Inmate by Frida McFadden. This one I made 14%. I said, maybe because this was my third Frida McFadden in the last week, I read a lot of Frida McFadden this year. But I just really wasn't getting into the story. The back and forth between present time and 11 years ago was irritating, and I didn't care about any of it because the setup wasn't that great. I don't remember a darn thing about that book. Next is Mr. Magic by Kirsten White. This one I made 23% of the way in. This was moving so slowly for me. The writing was really clunky and all the characters felt the same. Things kept getting repeated, especially the internal dialogue. I really tried to push through because I wanted to know what happened, but I just couldn't do it. That's fair. I have not heard great things about Mr. Magic, so I'm not that upset about it. Next is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. This one I made 100 pages in, but I felt like nothing was really happening and I just kind of lost interest in what was going on. Sometimes Stephen King is just too dense. I do still have this book and I have heard amazing things about it. So this for now might be a softie enough for me. Maybe I'll pick it up, but not anytime soon, I don't think. Next is Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. I'm gonna sneeze. This one I made 35% of the way in. I said, oh my gosh, I really have to sneeze. And it's not coming out. Okay, sorry, bear with me. This was just painful. Main character is 18, out here acting like she's 30 and starring on Sex and the City. The chess portion, kind of cool, but what 18-year-old acts like that? Like, what 18-year-old has that confidence? You know what I mean? I mean, good for her, but I didn't buy it. Next is Only If You're Lucky by Stacey Willingham. This one was kind of a bummer. The first Stacey Willingham I'd ever read, Flicker in the Dark, I loved. It was 5 stars. The second one by her, I didn't like quite as much, but I was hopeful that this one would be better, and obviously it wasn't. I made it 25% of the way in, and I said a quarter of the way in and nothing really happened. I wasn't feeling attached to the characters and they talked about weed way too much. Yeah, sometimes it irritates me, like, and it doesn't matter the substance. Honestly, it's like if there's something that's just talked about way too much, be it alcohol, drugs, pills, cigarettes even, I don't like that. It turns me off big time. Next is Manacled by Senlin Yu. This is a Hermione fan fiction, so a fan fiction of Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy. It is available on, I can't remember the platform, but I actually was listening to the audio that was done for it over on Spotify. It's not like a high quality production, but it was fine. First of all, this book is extremely long, like almost 2,000 pages. I don't even know how far I got in, maybe 50% of the way. So this book, it is a Hermione fan fiction, but it's also kind of heavily influenced by The Handmaid's Tale, which that part I found super interesting. And that's the part that I was able to get through pretty quickly because I do ship Hermione. But then like the middle part of the book, there's a lot of flashbacks to before. So like basically what happens is like I think like Harry Potter is gone and I don't know, a lot of characters are gone. Hermione is one of the many women that are basically forced to be a handmaid essentially for some Death Eaters, and Hermione is appointed to be the handmaid for Draco Malfoy. And if you've seen The Handmaid's Tale, I mean, you get the gist of what her purpose there is. That part of it I enjoyed, but then all the flashbacks, I'm like, oh, can we just get back to the main storyline? I really didn't care about the flashbacks. Do not quote me on this, but I have heard that Manacled is being traditionally published, like cleaned up and published, but obviously not as a fan fiction. Let me go to Goodreads, because I have seen something on there from Senlin Yu, and I think maybe, let me see. It's called Alchemized. and it's going to be published by Del Rey Books. A standalone dark fantasy set in a war-torn world of necromancy and alchemy with enemies to lovers romance that is by turn tender, toxic, and all-consuming. So I think they're like reworking it so it can be traditionally published. I might give it another go when that happens. We shall see. Next is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. This one I made it 57% of the way in before I decided to stop. And I said I was really enjoying the first 40% or so. It was atmospheric, it was funny, but shortly after I started to get so bored and never wanted to pick it back up. Kind of a bummer because I've heard amazing things about it and the book covers are so pretty. Like I really wanted to like it. Next is another one that I'm kind of bummed about, and that is Finley Donovan Rolls the Dice by El Casamano. This one I made 26% of the way in and I was very, very bored. This is a bit of a tongue. This series should have been a standalone because the first book was that good. Like, I loved Finley Donovan is killing it. I didn't need that sequel or the third or the fourth. I'm done. I'm not continuing on. Next is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This is another one that I got pretty far in. I made it 50%, and this is what I said. Why is this book over 400 pages? Meaning I read 200 pages of this book and decided that it was not worth my time. Why can Jane only remember things by sticking her tongue down August's throat, and why does she then compare the kiss to one of the dozens or hundreds of women she's kissed? I really enjoyed the side characters, but the story was dragging big time. Next is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. This one I made 14% of the way through. I said it's cool that this takes place in northern Michigan, and it was so nice listening to Meryl Streep for the audio, but this is not my kind of story. Just didn't hook me, and I didn't care. Next is The Husbands by Holly Gramazio. This one I got 16% of the way through, and I said didn't care much for the writing and the story just wasn't hooking me. This one also really irritated me. Like, it was so repetitive. Up the ladder he goes, down the ladder he's a different man, different marriage, different life, over and over and over. And honestly, I got to a point where I was like, what truly can come of this story? She finds one that she's accepting of and doesn't make him go up into the attic and change into somebody else. Cool premise, but didn't work for me. This next one I'm also kind of bummed about, and that is Jump Knots by Ho Jing Fang. This one I made 25% of the way through, but it took a long time to get to that 25%. My biggest complaint was surrounding the characters. Everyone seemed to know each other from before, and I felt like I was playing catch up, almost as if this was a sequel to a book I didn't read. I did find it comical in parts, especially with the expedition getting bigger and bigger because people kept inviting themselves. I'm bummed I decided to put it down because I would have liked to see the outcome with the alien contact, but life is too short to push through books you aren't enjoying. So this book, they're like planning an expedition to space because they think that they are receiving communication from aliens and they want to check it out. So it starts with like two people, and then this other person, they tell this other person about it, and they're like, oh, okay, cool, I'm gonna come too. And then this other character comes into the picture and they already know that person. I didn't feel like a reader. I felt like the fifth wheel, and almost like I'm joining them, and I don't know who anybody is, and like I'm just, like I said, trying to play catch up. It was just weird, and I'm really bummed because I was excited to read this one. Next is The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. I'm not super bummed about this one. Christina Lauren is hit or miss for me. I made it 35% of the way. The female main character was insufferable. Rich boy whose rich daddy doesn't approve of anything he does, blah, blah, blah. Like, I was so unimpressed with this one. Next. Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli. I made it 12% of the way in. I blame it on the fact that this is YA, and it takes a lot for me to enjoy a YA, and this one just wasn't doing it. I said just wasn't pulling me in. It wasn't bad, and I dare say it was interesting, but not something I wanted to commit to for 400 plus pages and 2 books. Next is The Witchstone by Henry H. Neff. This one I got as an e-arc from NetGalley. I made it 35% of the way in. This book wasn't what I was expecting. It reminded me of Sign Here, or a book written by Stephen King or Keith Rawson. Those aren't styles I gravitate towards, so ultimately this book wasn't for me. I have to be in the right mood to enjoy Stephen King or writing like his. It's very like gritty. That's the only word that I can really think to associate with that type of writing is gritty. Next is Not in Love by Allie Hazelwood. This one I made 19% of the way in. Not quite a quarter way and nothing has really happened. Your typical almost hook up the night before realizing you work together kind of. I'm curious about Florence's story, but not enough to push through, but I'm open to watching someone's spoilery vlog. This one is 0 stars, do not recommend by M.J. Wasmer, maybe Vosmer. This one I got 63% of the way in. The description of the book was so intriguing, so it's like people are at this resort and the sun burns out, and then you're kind of following the characters and what happens after that. While vacationing at an island resort, the sun explodes and chaos ensues. Had the sun truly exploded, life on Earth would quickly cease to exist, and yes, this is a sci-fi, but I could not get past that scientific fact. And yes, maybe had I completed the book, I would learn that the sun didn't really explode and it was something else. One thing that I took from this book is that in emergency situations, it likely would be the rich that think they're entitled to take over. So there was a lot of classism in this. So people who were not rich, they were kind of like automatically treated as lower class citizens, and it was like the rich people who just started to take over and decide who does what, who goes where, who gets the food and water rations. But I think the big thing for me, it was like, if the sun actually exploded, like, I don't think we'd be around long enough. Very curious, like, how long? If the sun exploded, Earth would not survive for any significant amount of time, essentially becoming uninhabitable within minutes of the explosion, due to the immediate loss of sunlight and the intense heat and radiation from the explosion reaching our planet, effectively wiping out all life on Earth almost instantly. I just couldn't get past that, of how unrealistic. And so that's kind of why it makes me think, like, maybe if I kept reading, maybe it would turn out like that's not at all what happened, and that's why people are still there. Or maybe it was like some kind of social experiment. I have no idea. Maybe I should look up spoilers because I'm kind of curious. Next is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This one I was kind of bummed about, but not really. I have read books that I've loved by T. Kingfisher, and I've certainly read books that I didn't enjoy. This one I made it 38% of the way in, and I just said I couldn't get into this one. The final book that I DNF'd in 2024 is In Defense of Witches, The Legacy of the Witch Hunts and Why Women are Still on Trial by Mona Chalet. This one I made 61% of the way through. I actually got it as an e-arc a couple years ago when it first came out, but this time I was just listening to it on audio, and I was really intrigued about the witches aspect and witch hunts and the trials and everything, but it wasn't so much about that as it was about modern day women and how we're still put on trial for being women, or for being hysterical, or for having periods, or, you know, things like that. It's not really what I wanted to read about. I wanted more of the historical, like, witch trial stuff that I thought I was getting when I went into this book. So those are all the books that I DNF'd in 2024. Let me know if there are any books on this list that you are absolutely convinced that I should pick back up, and why. And just maybe I'll let you convince me. Please do remember to like and subscribe, and until next time, bye.